orderly station.
This story is about Jeremy, a geneticist who worked in New York City. There was a mental hospital for women on the outskirts of the city. A cold, scary hospital where Jeremy Betters reigned supreme. Or maybe he thought so. There was a patient in that hospital named Margot. She was 44 years old, had no children, and was a single woman. She was admitted to the psychiatric hospital a year ago when she wanted to kidnap and take away another woman's child in a maternity hospital. She was arrested but recognized as mentally ill. Her ward number 10 is a white room with a bed and a wash basin. I work as a nurse in this hospital and deliver medicines to patients every evening. You can't trust anyone here because something strange happens every day. I make notes in my diary about every day I spend in the hospital to find out what this place is. We have an experienced geneticist at the hospital, Jeremy. I find him strange and don't understand him. One winter evening, while reading through the archival records, I noticed that the patient base had significantly decreased over the past month, but I knew nothing about this, so it seemed very strange to me. I began to notice that it was after Jeremy's examinations that the patient files began to disappear. In our hospital, there is a room that can only be accessed with electronic keys. I don't have access to it, but there's definitely something going on in there. Today is Thursday. It's winter outside and the hospital has big problems with heating. That's why the patients were given warm blankets and no one is allowed out of the wards, because it's very cold in the corridors. There are almost no doctors because they all quit because of the terrible work. Jeremy and another doctor are the only ones left. I was walking through the corridors to do a night inspection. I was cold, so I smoked a cigarette to keep warm. But suddenly, at the end of the corridor, I heard someone moaning. I felt confused and I did not understand what was happening. Jeremy came out of Ward 10 with a nurse and brought out a woman on a gurney who seemed to be sleeping. Jeremy told me to go rest and he would make his rounds. They started wheeling the woman into a room I had no access to. I did not know what was happening, and it was a mystery to me. The strangest thing was that the woman was completely naked, and it was impossible to stand in the corridor without street clothes. It was that woman, that crazy woman who wanted to steal the child. And why did they take her there? She's not aggressive. I went to the residence room to make myself some coffee and watch a movie. And while I was making coffee, I heard a scream coming from that closed ward. The scream was very loud and long, but after a few minutes it stopped, and there was a deep silence that was frightening. I approached the door very quietly and began to watch what was happening through the crack. That day my heart was beating as hard as it had ever been before. I saw a woman with some tubes sticking out of her stomach. She was almost dead. Her hands were chained to a special bed, but through these tubes, some strange liquid was entering her body. The woman started shaking and foam came out of her mouth. I didn't know what to do. I was scared. After 10 minutes, Jeremy said that the woman had died and asked the nurse to write down the time of death. I quickly ran to the residence room. That night I did not sleep well. I had nightmares and various horrors. But in the morning, I came up with a plan to hide in that room and find out what was going on. The day went on as usual, and no one even asked about the woman's disappearance. And when night came, a woman's body was taken out of room 13 into the corridor. It was a woman of about 30 years old. She was naked and covered with a sheet. I watched from the end of the corridor so that no one would see me. I wondered what they were doing and why they were doing it. I would have called the police, but I didn't have any evidence of a disappearance. The next night, the situation repeated itself and I watched it to the end. But this time I hid in the closet. The woman was lying naked, with tubes sticking out of her stomach, feeding her fluids. The woman began to shake. When Jeremy and his nurse left the room, they locked it with a special key. I was left alone in that room. While I was looking for an explanation for what was happening, I came across a hatch. When I opened it, I saw steps down. On the table, I found documents that helped me understand what was happening. Dr. Jeremy had a wife, but she died, and he wanted to resurrect her, or rather her DNA. He implanted DNA cells into women, but the women's bodies rejected them and they died. Jeremy wanted to inject his wife's DNA so that he could impregnate this woman and have a child with his wife. Wouldn't he be punished for these murders? I didn't understand why he was so fearless in that hospital. I saw another door and went in. There were different test tubes and chemicals, but when I turned my head, I was very scared because I saw the bodies of pregnant women in glass cylinders. I took out my phone to take a picture, but I opened my eyes and 2 doctors came into my room. One handed me some medicine, but for some reason my hands were tied in a white shirt. The doctor said that this patient was particularly violent this week and ordered me to take a shot of sleeping pills. What is this? Have they declassified me and decided to get even with me like this? Where is Jeremy? I asked the doctors, but they just laughed and didn't answer me. I was a patient in a psychiatric hospital, and it was all just in my imagination. But I don't know if everything is real now.
This story is about an orderly who witnessed the horrific actions of doctors in a psychiatric hospital. Jeremy was a geneticist who killed women for the sake of research. He wanted to resurrect his wife's DNA, so he injected it into women who were being treated in this hospital. An orderly named Mike saw this, but was very surprised why no one was doing anything to protect the women. But one day he went too far and saw women raising their babies in aquariums. He wanted to take a picture of it, but he woke up and now we realized that it was just his imagination, and he was a patient in a psychiatric hospital. Michael was a patient, not an orderly.